All right, let's take a look at Unit 3, market structures and labor. A market is anything or any place where things are bought and sold. So if candy is bought and sold, there is a candy market. If you want to get more specific, Snickers bars, there is a Snickers market. Anything where anything is bought and sold, you call it a market. But all markets have structures, and there are certain structures that make it more efficient to sell Snickers bars or something like that. So here are the review questions. If you need to write them down, go ahead and pause. All right, let's take a look at the cost of producing. So you're producing products. So you have labor and output. Owners decide, what business structure they want to use. It isn't like they have like a checklist, like I will use this business structure. It just sort of happens organically based upon your needs. And when you output something, it's based on marginal decisions. So what that means is when you, say, produce T-shirts that are selling, you may or may not want to hire someone else to assist you in producing the T-shirts, because not only do you have to produce the T-shirts, the actual T-shirts themselves, you have to keep track of the financial stuff. So if someone produces the T-shirts and then you take care of the financial stuff, that's a certain type of market structure. You have production costs. We already talked about it. You have fixed costs, variable costs, and all of those equal your total cost. But then you have your marginal costs. So what you do is you take a look at how many T-shirts did you sell, and you divide that by your total cost. So then you have each T-shirt cost you $15. Well, if you want to make a profit, then your T-shirt sales need to be above $15, or your sales price needs to be above $15. Otherwise, why even be in business? You want to maximize profits, so you want to maximize both your revenue and your profits. Revenue is how much money do you make in a day. Profits is your revenue minus costs. And then are you going to shut down? If you're losing money, the product of the business, maybe people aren't buying your shirts anymore and you can't come up with a good idea. And then you just take a look at your operating cost versus your revenue. If you start seeing your profits dip, that's usually a sign that you're not making enough sales to keep the business open. You can choose to shrink the business, like let's say you open up an entire warehouse where you're producing these shirts, but then you start seeing profits dwindle. You can maybe scale back down and go back into your garage or something like that and continue to produce. And if people still don't want it, then hey, you have a cool story you get to tell people where this one time you had a business selling shirts. So we need to talk about perfect competition. Perfect competition does not exist because nothing's perfect. But like I said, in economics, we have to picture the perfect scenario. That way everything else can make sense. So in perfect competition, you have many buyers and you have many sellers. So by many, it's unlimited. You just have many. You can't really put a number on it, but I would say more than 5, depending. And you know that you have enough sellers when you have a choice. So like in some areas, you have Comcast, AT&T, or DirecTV for your TV or internet. Well, if those are your 3 choices, yes, there are many buyers and sellers, but if you add more buyers and sellers, do prices go down? So you have a good choice when you can negotiate prices. But if Verizon raises your bill and says there's nothing we can do about it, and you're like, screw you, I'm going to AT&T, and then after 5 years AT&T does the same thing to you, then you don't really have a choice. You don't have enough sellers in the market. Sellers offer identical products, meaning you can't tell the difference from one product to another. You know what they are and you know what they mean, but sometimes you may see something like a blind taste test where you have two different sodas and they make you test it, but they cover up the label to the soda or pour it into a paper cup. If you can tell which one is Pepsi or which one is Coke, that is not an identical product. Buyers and sellers are well informed about products. Nobody knows everything about what they're buying. Hopefully you know that if you buy a canned good and there is a dent in the middle of the can, that's probably safe. But if you have a dent at the lid of the can, that's probably unsafe because that can could be open and bacteria can get in. If you did not know that, there you are. You may not know that if you buy bread and it goes moldy, digging down, finding the non-moldy pieces and then eating those isn't good because the mold is airborne and basically gets on all pieces of bread within that loaf of bread. If you did not know that, you probably want to start throwing your bread away. You probably want to know if there's mold on a piece of fruit, you can cut off that mold and continue eating the piece of fruit because it is not like bread mold. If you did not know that, there you are. So you may not know everything about every product that you buy. It even gets any crazier than that. If you're unconscious and you're taken to the hospital in an ambulance, they'll charge you for the ambulance, even though you didn't agree to an ambulance, whatever. You still have to pay for it. So that's a case where you're totally not informed of the product. And there are no barriers to entry. This one is like you can start your own cable company. You can provide your own internet service. Of course, that is impossible because the logistics of providing your own internet service just isn't there. But you can make your own t-shirts in your garage. That's a very low barrier to entry. All you need is a really good idea. So non-price competition. The first one is advertising. And we'll watch a little video on advertising. But advertising is what makes products not look the same. So really there is no huge chemical change between Crest toothpaste and Colgate toothpaste. But they advertise and say that there are differences and people either choose one or over the other. And that's a way of competing, making your two products compete by not lowering prices. Memberships, Safeway, like if you scan a card, you get your groceries cheaper or something like that. So they have these memberships like that. Costco, you have a membership and they're more strict about those memberships, like you can't shop there without it. Different packaging, they put cartoon characters on cereal boxes to attract children when it's just basically, just sugar. There's usually nothing healthy about it. Product differentiation. So it's kind of like you have Coke and Pepsi and they say that Pepsi has this in it, Coke has this in it. But this that they put into it really doesn't matter if you're drinking just basically sugar water. It just like we put NutraSweet or we put Splenda in it or we put this or we put that. There's just no difference in the quality. You may taste a difference, but when it comes down to having a soda, there really is no big difference. Companies will have sales. Now you may think that does determine price, but they're not losing any money when they have a sale. It's money they would have lost anyways, because any stock they have on the shelves when they need to put new stock out there is a loss in money. So a sale is a way for them to lose less money. So there really isn't that big of a loss to a business if they have stuff go on sale. Branding, so like Google is a verb. if you can create a product, like what do you call the sticks with cotton on the ends that you stick in your ears? You call them Q-tips. Q-tips are not, well, first off, you're not supposed to stick them in your ears. Read the box. It says don't stick in your ears. Secondly, but that's like all you know how to do with them. Secondly, Q-tip is a brand name. So like Google. Google is the name of the company, and it's also a verb. So if your product becomes a verb, your product isn't going anywhere. Signaling, so you have price signaling where you raise and lower prices in order to signal if something is good or something is going to go on sale. And then we'll talk about e-cigarettes and how they compete, because it's a little bit more complex than the above. I mean, they use nicotine, which is an addictive chemical that's completely legal. Monopolistic competition. So here's some differences. Whoops. So we'll take a look at monopolistic competition. So conditions that lead to monopolies. Desire for profits and acquisition. So if you're making a lot of profits off your t-shirt company and you have just money in the bank, and then you see a competitor, and this competitor is just starting up and he's making a lot of t-shirts, you can go to that competitor with your profits and say, hey, you know what? I'd like to buy your business. I want you to keep making the t-shirts, but I want to buy the rights to your design. And we'll split it. You get 50% of the profits and I get 50%. Or ownership would be you get 60, he gets 40. And if he agrees to it, fine. You just acquired another business and then you're making more profits. Market failures. So there isn't a market. So Domino's Pizza had this gimmick. If there's a pothole, they'll fill the pot. You tell them they'll fill the pothole and they'll stamp Domino's Pizza on it. And a lot of people are like, hey, look, Domino's Pizza is paving over the roads. But if you take a look at all the roads in a city, they're not owned by Domino's Pizza. If Domino's Pizza tried to repave all of the roads in the United States, they would go broke. So this whole idea that Domino's Pizza somehow is going to fix the roads is just absolutely stupid. So what happens is the government steps in and creates a market, or at least creates a product or a service that the economy needs. Another one is patents. A patent is or copyright, kind of the same thing. A patent is where you create something, you go to the government and say, I created this and I don't want people to copy me. So I want to be the only person who is able to sell this one product. And patents can last, just a different amount of years. One thing that's really weird, so like copyright is for written stuff. And so you take a book like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which the story in and of itself is out of copyright, meaning anybody can download it, it's for free, yada, yada, yada. So if you go into a bookstore and pick up a copy of Frankenstein, take it back to your house, and let's say I'm a teacher, and I run copies off, and I copy it, and I give each kid a copy off of a book I bought at a bookstore, I just violated copyright. And the reason why I violated copyright is sometimes within the books, publishers will add stuff in there. And if I copy the stuff that is added in there, they own the copyright to that. So it's kind of like, it's kind of a clever way for them to get around copyright. And then markets with economies of scale. So I'll take a look. Here's economies of scale. So Walmart is huge, and Walmart is huge because they were able to get the product that they buy to sell in their stores from the distributor. So the Tide Pods comes from Tide. Okay, so they need a way to get Tide into their stores faster. So instead of having Tide and then all these other trucks show up late at night and cause a traffic jam at each store, what they do is they build these warehouses out in the middle of nowhere, and you have these Tide and other Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and they drive their trucks out to these distribution centers out in the middle of nowhere. And then Walmart has its own trucking to take whatever that store needs, because not every store needs an entire truckload of Pepsi. They may just need like a quarter of a truckload of Pepsi. So they take all that stuff to their Walmart, and that lowers the cost of getting their products from point A to point B. Their distributors don't charge them as much, yada, yada, yada. So they're able to get their product in their stores cheaper. And that's how Walmart was able to grow so much and put other companies out of business, because they were able to create economies of scale. They were just able to scale up because their operating costs went down. The cost to operate went down because of their whole trucking scheme. So like buying in bulk. Bulk is cheaper because it costs nothing for a producer to produce more of something. It costs a producer, like, this is where specialization comes in. It's easier to do one thing well than a bunch of things all at once. Or it's like if your day is filled with doing all these little jobs, you actually get less done than if you do just one job. All right, vertical integration and horizontal integration. So you have what's called a supply chain. So let's say, well, we'll just use this. You have cows, they're part of the supply chain, and then you kill them, and then you have railroad cars to take the meat, well, kill them, carve up the meat, and then you have railroad cars to transport them somewhere, and then you have warehouses where they keep it cold, and then they carve up the meat more and they put it into packaging, and then they deliver the meat to maybe different stores, and that is your company, Ace Meat Industries. So you have different steps along the way that can be individually done by different companies. Now, what Ace Meats ends up doing is it is cheaper if they buy each of these functions. Okay, instead of having to pay money and worry about, because when a company buys something from another company, every company wants to make profit. So not only are you buying the product, you're also paying for the profits the other company wants to make. Well, if you just buy that company, their profits are your profits, so costs go down. It also becomes more efficient. You may not need as many employees if you bring like the cattle yard to the slaughterhouse or something like that. Horizontal integration is where you take companies that perform the same function, and then U.S. oil company buys all of these just independent oil refineries. Now, what a lot of companies do is they do vertical and horizontal at the same time, so they kind of do both. They call it diagonal, if you will, but they do both at the same time. So banks are a good example. Banks do many different functions that actually used to be different enterprises, like the government split up all of the functions a bank does. So like buying stocks, or saving your money, or loans, loaning out money, or mortgages, which is a loan on a house, just different things. Now banks bought all of those functions and put them all under the same umbrella. So you walk into a Bank of America and you can walk over here for a bank mortgage. You can walk over here for a car loan. You can walk over here to make a cash deposit. You can walk over here to, you have savings and checking. Those were two different functions. So that's kind of how, and then Bank of America bought other banks. I think they bought Washington Mutual and a bunch of other banks that existed pre-2010. So they both vertically and horizontally integrated. So let's take a look at this competition now. Remember, you have perfect competition, but you also have monopolies. So monopoly is complete market control where you have no competition. Now, it isn't that it's like the game Monopoly. Winning isn't owning everything on the board. Winning is putting all of the other players out of business. That's when you have a monopoly. When you're the only game in town, you don't have to own every property. The game stops when you're the only dude. You don't keep playing by yourself, grabbing up properties. The game ends when everyone else is broke. So you have a government monopoly. Now, government monopoly is like roads, schooling, although you do have private schools. National defense is a monopoly because you don't have private armies in the United States. So the government does have monopolies over certain goods and services, certain markets. They also threw down antitrust laws, and they're in place to break up monopolies because with a monopoly, you can charge whatever you want. You have complete control over a market. People can't get in and compete. And like I said, when it comes to making profits, the best way to make a profit is to acquire other people. Like Facebook. Facebook owns Instagram. That was their big thing. When you see a company start just buying other people's ideas, but they don't generate any good ideas of their own, that main company may go out of business, because what happens when they run out of good ideas to buy? So you want a company that can continue innovating without having to mooch off other people. Now, they could stay in business because there's a lot of other good ideas out there and they just keep buying them, in which case Facebook is still in business. But if they run out of good ideas, or the ideas that they buy end up being garbage at the end of the day, well, they may go out of business. A merger is, like I said, when you acquire another business, businesses merge together, and the government can intervene. They have to approve it. That's part of the antitrust laws. They have to approve it and say, yes, you can merge. I think, what was it? AT&T and T-Mobile were going to merge, and the government said no, because they dominate too much of the market. And I mean, it's kind of easy to determine, because if you see their stores everywhere in a certain area and Verizon hasn't moved in, or you don't see Boost Mobile or anything like that in the area, that usually gives you a hint that, like, let's say you live in a town, and in that town you only see AT&T, you got to drive 50 miles away to find a Verizon, and Boost Mobile, you don't even know what that is. That can cause a monopoly, and the government is into, examples, Standard Oil, they broke up Standard Oil. Bell Labs, so the telephone company, so Verizon, AT&T all came from Bell Labs. Microsoft, they tried to break it up because they were acting monopolistically in the late 90s. You had Internet Explorer, which was to browse the internet, and then you had the software Windows, which is, point and click and all that stuff. So the point and click stuff was Windows, and then you had Internet Explorer to explore the internet. Well, you had a company called Netscape, and they're no longer around. But Netscape created a browser to cruise the internet. And what ended up happening is Microsoft would update its software and kick Netscape out. So Netscape would have to figure out what Microsoft did, update their software, and then try to have it to where people can continue using Netscape. And Microsoft just kept updating their software. And Bill Gates had to go before Congress and testify and all that stuff. But because Congress doesn't understand technology, Microsoft, they were going to split Microsoft up into, you had Microsoft Windows and then you had Internet Explorer. They're going to make them two separate companies. But the thing is, though, is it doesn't work that way. Microsoft offered Internet Explorer because of the sales on Windows. If you break off Internet Explorer, it isn't a company. It's a program. So Microsoft was allowed to keep Internet Explorer, but then you started to see other competitors that could keep up with Windows updating. And then you had Sirius and XM radio, just satellite radio, and then they combined, and now you have, I don't know if it's XM, or I think just Sirius radio. I don't know. But they combined. So you have a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly is like Windows 95. Windows is on a personal computer, a PC, and I think they own, of the PC market, they own 85%, 80 to 85%. That's a natural monopoly. Like if you start a business and you go out to buy a computer, you're probably going to buy a PC. You don't want to use a Chromebook because Google's products can't keep up with what you need to do to run a business. You can buy a Mac, but Macs are more for if you design stuff. Like if you have your t-shirt company, maybe a MacBook will work. But if you run a business and you need to keep accounting software, a PC is probably a better way to go. Advertising and product labels, those can cause natural monopolies. When you think of soup, you can probably picture like a certain label, but then when you go into the store, you're like, oh, wow, okay, that's a different kind of soup. So through labeling and advertising, monopolies can be created. Like Google, they were the only internet search in town, and their company turned into a verb. You Google something. You don't say, hey, the War of 1812, where can I look stuff up? Oh, you need to get into a browser and surf the internet. We don't say that anymore. We just Google it, dude. Microsoft tried it with Bing. Just Bing it. And it just failed miserably. And then, product safety. And product safety is the government has a monopoly on product safety. So if a product is unsafe, the government can recall it. You have the FDA. They keep track to whether or not food and drugs are safe and stuff like that. So, if a company, there was a thing where I think spinach was coming in from Mexico and it had E. coli and people were getting sick. And that's kind of where the FDA kind of dropped the ball a bit. You have a black market, drugs. A black market is a black market because nobody knows where the economic activity is taking place. We just know that it happens. You can kind of tell there's a dude standing on a corner just milling around and somebody walks up and things are exchanged, money for something slipped in the palm of his hand. We're not stupid. It's just that it's not tracked. So a black market is a black market because if something is made illegal, so you have property, marijuana or cocaine. Let's go with cocaine. So you have property. Your property is cocaine, and you want to sell your property. The government says selling cocaine is illegal. All right. So if someone steals your cocaine, like uses guns and shoots at you, and you drop your suitcase full of cocaine and they take it, you can't go to the police and say, hey, somebody stole my cocaine. You just can't do that. You can't depend on the government to remedy your situation. So you end up protecting your cocaine with violence as well. So if someone tries to rob you, you shoot them back. And then it becomes this arms race where someone's probably going to try to take my cocaine or take over my enterprise. So I need to do what I can to protect myself. And then the other person does the same, and it keeps just growing and growing and growing and growing. So some black markets are actually not good. You don't really want black markets. You want markets that are out in the open. And then you have rationing, and rationing is where markets are controlled either by the government or, usually the government. During World War II, we rationed meat and other products because they needed to be used for war. So that's going to be a video on private roads. And oligopoly is where a few firms work together. So you have a few firms, you have some variety of goods, even though it's the same good. You have a higher barrier to entry. You can't just make your own Pepsi and be like, all right, or soft drink or soda. You can't make your own soda and be like, all right, I'm going to put this in stores. And they do have control over prices. And an oligopoly is basically a cartel. You have businesses working together to set prices. So a cartel, you may have heard, like a drug cartel. Well, a drug cartel, they have territory. And you're not supposed to do this, but businesses do it anyways. It's like against the law, but you do it anyways. My grandfather owned a business, and he rented construction equipment. And there was another guy in town who rented construction equipment too. And they worked together to set prices. So he'd go talk to the other owner. Hey, I just saw you bought a forklift. You're going to rent it. What are you renting that at? Oh, it's $50 a day. All right. So my grandfather would set his price to $50 a day. So the fact that people had a choice allowed competition, and my grandfather structured his pricing different than the other guy, and people would come select us, or people would go to him, when in actuality it didn't matter who they went to, they'd be paying pretty much the same amount of money. And this is called collusion, when businesses work together to set prices or set territory. There's a rental company, Cat Rental Company, and so Cat equipment, the big yellow pieces of equipment like the bulldozers and stuff like that, that's Cat, and they make the equipment. But then they have people who go to them and say, I'd like to open stores so people can rent this equipment instead of having to buy it, because there is money in renting construction equipment. You have one job, why buy a bulldozer when you can just rent it and take it back? Makes more sense. So you have Quinn Rentals, which is from LA County to Salinas. That is their territory in the state of California. Anything above Salinas is a different company. Anything from LA down to San Diego is a different company. So if someone from San Diego called the Quinn company, they would redirect them to the LA company because they had a territory. Drug cartels have territory. Gangs have territory. You see this with illegal activity. You stay within your real estate, and whenever someone approaches you for your product, you sell to them. You don't encroach past a certain street or something like that.